How's it going, everyone? Shiny Plume here, and welcome back to another episode of What We Duel in the Shadow Realm. Today, I have a deck that, much like my Plant Princess deck, is one that I've played for a very long time, back before I started playing Yu-Gi-Oh! In real life. Introducing Predaplants. This is an anime archetype played by one of the villains of Arc 5, Yuri. I don't know much about Arc 5, I'm sorry. I'm not really big into the Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime. But when I played Legacy of Duelists in 2019, this was my second favorite deck that I ever played. It taught me a lot about the fusion summoning mechanic. However, for me, it wasn't as fun as my other plant decks, mostly because it rarely feels like a traditional plant strategy. It more seems like they're plants because, well, that's what they are aesthetically. It does allow for Predaplants to branch out using cards that most other plant decks can't use. And since it actually doesn't really lock you into anything, it can use things like a fusion package. Hence, you see a small branded package in this version of the deck. Predaplant branded was a very popular way to play Predaplants back in 2022 when Dimension Force came out, and had a very brief run in the meta at the time. However, the deck kind of fell off because of power creep, and it was no longer the best way to play Branded after more support for Branded came out and Branded Fusion went to 1. So yeah, power creep has not been kind to this deck, but it has some merits that is a blind second OTK deck. And that's something to keep in mind in my replays, is that I built this to be a blind second OTK deck, and you'll see in all my replays I opted to go second with the deck. Nonetheless, let's get into the replays and the cards I want to talk about. So what's kind of interesting about the Predaplant deck is that it actually has some extremely powerful cards in it. The main starter for the deck is Predaplant Offer Scorpio. Offer Scorpio is you send a monster from your hand to graveyard, special summon any Predaplant from your deck. You mainly see this to summon Predaplant Darnatonia Cobra, which if it's summoned by the effect of a Predaplant monster, you can add any fusion or polymerization spell from your deck to your hand. You can add regular polymerization, you can add super polymerization, you can add branded fusion, you can add fusion destiny, you can add instant fusion. There is not much of a limit to what you can add as long as it has the word fusion or polymerization in its text. That means that Predaplants on their own can be used as an engine, as with a lot of versatility. And in fact, that was the case for a little while. It was that good at getting anything. Drawing the Darnatonia Cobra is the worst feeling ever. Like, I'm sure that many Yu-Gi-Oh! Players will talk about drawing the Garnet. Darnatonia Cobra is one of the worst Garnets you can draw. As long as you have branded cards, it's not as bad of a brick. It still is, but it's not the greatest. That being said, what branded package offers in this deck is extra starters, basically. Branded Opening is a great way to start your combos because it summons a Luber and it can discard Predaplant Biblisp. Predaplant Biblisp is one of the most insane support cards for this deck. If it's sent to graveyard, you can add any Predaplant monster to your hand. It is once per turn, but there's so many ways to discard this card or send it from deck to graveyard that it almost always goes off. But yeah, back to the branded stuff. So you usually use Branded Opening to summon a Luber to search Branded Fusion, and Branded Fusion is a one-card combo for this deck, technically. It's more 1.5 because you still need a monster to discard for the Offer Scorpio, but what Branded Fusion does is you can send Albaz, and you may have noticed a card called Stay Sailor Romarin in the deck. Stay Sailor Romarin is a light plant monster that on being sent to graveyard sends a level 5 or lower plant monster from your deck to grave. The reason that's played in this deck is because with Branded Fusion, you can send Albaz and Stay Sailor to summon Albion, and then Albion would be able to fuse into Lubellion, Mirror Jade, even can be used to summon a Predaplant fusion. But the other thing is that Stay Sailor Romarin triggers to send the Predaplant Biblisp from deck to grave, which searches a Predaplant monster. You can see how the branded cards bridge into the Predaplant cards, and as with Darnatonia Cobra, the Predaplant cards can bridge into the branded cards. So this deck really uses both interchangeably. Then some other cards that are really good in this deck is Predapractice. Predapractice is a really good card in this deck because you can special summon a Predaplant monster from your hand and then search another Predaplant monster, but you're locked into fusions for the turn. That's like the only lock Predaplants technically have, is being locked into fusions, but Predapractice isn't necessary if you want to play Predaplant as an engine. The rest of the Predaplant monsters there are for utility. So this deck has 2 Pendulum monsters that it utilizes, Buffalicula and Triantis. So Buffalicula is effectively a polymerization while it's in the Pendulum scale, and Triantis is being able to use both your monsters in the Pendulum scales as fusion material. And they also have other effects where if they're used as fusion material, Buffalicula so it adds back to Triantis, and the Triantis distributes Predator counters. Now, Predator counters is a sub-theme of the Predaplant deck. What Predator counters do is that if they're put on a monster, that monster becomes level 1. Now, that usually doesn't affect the game at all, unless your opponent's playing like a Synchro or an XZ's based strategy. But the other reason that Predator counters are really good is it synergizes well with some of the other cards in the deck, such as Darlingtonia Cobra, where anything with a Predator counter that your opponent controls effectively is skill drained. Or the fact that Starving Venom Predator Power Fusion Dragon, if your opponent activates a card or effect, you can tribute one monster that has a Predator counter on it, whether it's your opponent's monster or your own monster, and negate the activation. Or it's making it level 1 works for Predaplant Chimeraphlasia, which can banish a monster whose level is less than or equal to Chimeraphlasia's level, which is level 7. So then becoming level 1 means you can banish any monster that has a level, as long as it has a Predator counter. Alternatively, one of my favorite plays with it is with the monster Predaplant. I'm not going to bother saying its name. It's Sundew. It's a level 2. Any monster that has a Predator counter on it, if it would be used as fusion material, can be treated as a dark monster. And so what you can do is Sundew lets you fusion summon using your hand or field or monsters your opponent controls that have Predator counters on them. And since they're treated as dark monsters, they can be used easily for your Predaplant fusions. Because Predaplants is much more of a dark deck than it is a plant deck. What makes it so powerful is that it can use your opponent's monsters for its fusion materials, and that's what it's most famous for. Hence why this deck runs a lot of copies of Super Polymerization. Super Polymerization is one of the best cards in this deck by a landslide. And it helps lend to the OTK strategy because the last monster, that one that mostly secures the victory, and as you might see in a lot of the replays, is Predaplant Trifiovarutum. Trifiovarutum has an interesting effect where it can negate the summon of an extra deck monster, such as a Link monster, a Synchro monster, an XYZ monster, but that's not the reason you played in this deck. The reason you played in this deck is because it gains attack equal to the attack of all other monsters on the field, both sides of the field, that have Predator counters on them. Since Triantis distributes Predator counters among monsters on both sides of the field up to the number of monsters you control, you can just choose all the monsters that have the most attack to get a Predator counter on them. Most of the time it's your own monsters, but sometimes your opponent has the bigger monster. So it will gain the attack of all those monsters, and that's what lends to the OTK strategy. Of course, all this sounds like it does have a lot of going first potential with Dragostapelia and Starving Venom Predator Power Fusion Dragon and Trifiovarutum. And while true, it does have a lot of going first stuff, especially with the 2 trap cards, Branded Banishment and Predaplanting. Like, on the surface it seems like it does, but it doesn't actually because it requires a lot of resources. So here we are back with the deck, and you can clearly see, I didn't really talk about it much, but the non-engine also lends to the blind second strategy with the Charmies, the Drolls, and the Super Polys. So this version of the deck really does lean heavily into that going second strategy. And that's perfectly fine for this deck. I think it's fantastic, honestly. It makes it a lot more fun than other going second decks, because you're actually using your opponent's monsters to your advantage, rather than just wiping them away or turning them into kaijus or something. No, you're actually using them as fusion material, and that's ridiculously fun. What do you guys think of this deck? I really hope that Predaplants get more support in the future, because this is a really fun deck to play, and I really hope it has much better potential for going first. During the end phase, Head Over His Back. Thank you all for watching. Peace.